The world is too beautiful to be praised by just one voice, and too broken to be healed by just one set of hands. And that is why we need these companions and this community for the important work of savoring and saving the world. These words are from my colleague, Reverend Rob Hardy's at All Souls Church Unitarian in DC, and these words have grounded us at All Souls since November. And I say them now partly to express our thanks for the bringing together of these companions, all of us here. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, all the organizers. Thank you for this opportunity for all of us to hearten and strengthen one another through our presence here. The morning following the election, people began to arrive at our church. There were no meetings scheduled, but people came. One young adult said to me, "I don't know where to go or what to do. Can I just hang out at the church today?" By evening, when we began ringing the bell for our regular Vesper service, people literally were streaming into the sanctuary. They came seeking touch, connection with others, and seeking a sacred space of beauty. There were no political speeches that night. We lit candles, sat together for long, silent meditation, and chanted our prayers. Gathered here in the mystery of this hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. You and all the world are holy. Return again. Return again. Return to the home of your birth. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are born and reborn again. We all know this is a critical moment for our nation. An avowed sexual abuser has been elected to the highest office of the land. An abuser who first rose to political prominence by leading the charge as a white man to discredit the legitimacy of the nation's first African-American president by lying about him over and over and over again. Racism and heterosexism are now on the throne. And bodies that were already at risk, already being harmed, Black bodies, brown bodies, women's bodies, Muslim bodies, indigenous bodies, queer and differently abled bodies, and Earth's body are now in even more danger. This backlash moment is like what happens when a woman in an abusive relationship takes steps to leave. She moves out. She declares she will no longer submit to violence or be seduced by lies that she has loved. She takes the steps to create a different life, a new life, and that is the most dangerous moment for her. That's when everyone who works with domestic violence knows. That's when the abuser will try the hardest to stop her. And that's when she most needs not to be isolated. People have been moving out of the house of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy for some time now. the Poor People's Campaign, the Rainbow Coalition, the Obama Coalition, Occupy Wall Street, etc. For some of us, this has been a lifelong struggle to name the lies, face the harm, grieve the lives lost, repair the damage when we could, heal ourselves, and create alternative, life-giving communities. And now, the backlash has intensified. And so more than ever, we need not to be isolated. We need to form protective circles for those most at risk, and we need solidarity in the flesh. And for that, we need to continually build our capacity to be there for one another, be there with one another, having one another's backs, not betraying one another, proving ourselves to be trustworthy and faithful. And this is not easy because we do not forge solidarity with one another in the midst of our differences on a level playing field. We come to coalition building from diverse locations, each with our own mix of internalized oppressions and unexamined privileges, our own combination of unhealed wounds and power. We come to the coalition beautiful and broken, strong and overburdened, ready to act and needing to rest. And solidarity in the flesh requires us to be changed by our need for one another and by our desire to truly do right by one another. So here are a few field notes. I have 3 on the changes and transformations solidarity in the flesh requires of us within our own communities of resistance. First, those of us who are white, who have been shaped to be carriers of white supremacy, and therefore are in captivity to the power of white narcissism, need to get over our benevolent paternalism. Benevolent paternalism is so pernicious within us, it's a lifelong task. But here's a story of how I first began to learn this. When I was a young minister, the church I served made a commitment to be in solidarity with refugees during the first sanctuary movement. Refugees were fleeing torture in Central America and South America, and refugees were fleeing the genocide in Cambodia. The Cambodian refugee family who came to be with us included a father, Tom, a mother, Mealia, and 3 small children. We took them in, helped them get settled in an apartment, start ESL classes, helped Tom find work, and helped Mealia with the child care. About 6 months after they arrived, when things seemed to be going well, I got a frantic call from the chair of our refugee committee. Mealia had called her in tears and in a panic. Tom had left them. He'd taken their little bit of savings, their car, and left a note saying he was not coming back. Mealia was abandoned with 3 small children. Knowing she was without any cash, I immediately rushed over to Mealia's home, bringing bags of groceries, which I hauled into her kitchen. Pushing past her, I started filling up her shelves and her refrigerator with the groceries I'd brought, all the while telling her how sorry I was that Tom had left, but that the church was there with her. We were going to get her through. We'd get her signed up for more ESL classes. We'd help her find a job. We'd organize childcare for the children. Mealia watched silently and then came over and put her hand on my arm and said, "Stop." I stopped and turned and looked at her, and she said, "Why can't you just be my friend? I don't need all this." And then she motioned for me to come sit by her on the couch. "A friend," she said, "would listen to me." Maelia disrupted my absorption in being the rescuing hero. Caught up in my own confidence that I knew what was needed and I would provide it, she asserted her actual presence and asked the same from me. Benevolent paternalism or benevolent maternalism isn't solidarity. It's just another form of white supremacy acting out its ignorance of itself and of others. Truth was, my own spouse had left me around the same time. Maelia knew that. And what she expected of me was that I could and would be with her in truth, as a human being, face to face, in genuine I-thou meeting. Lesson: when someone you think you are helping takes the trouble to tell you that what you are doing is not helping, listen to them. Better yet, if you want to help, start by showing up and asking, what is the help that will really help? And then don't debate it, don't question it, just do it. Revolutionary love in the flesh is grounded in friendship, in the forging of friendship that goes beyond a dynamic that perpetuates the power of the privileged and the presumed helplessness of the oppressed. Together, we can break this frame and experience a different communion, a life-giving connection, human being to human being. Second, solidarity work requires us to give attention to what must be done to recover from and resist the impact of hostility and opposition. The reality of backlash is that it causes real harm. It harms actual bodies. It harms souls. And its goal is to put pressure on the bonds of relationship and connection that are the sinews of our communities, movements, and progressive institutions. I learned a great deal about the resistance of whites to the transformation of liberal white institutions over the course of my 25 years of work at Starr King School for the Ministry, where today, what was once a historically white liberal institution is a counter-oppressive, multi-religious, and multiracial theological school. But every step that we took at Starr King School to move beyond the school's historic white liberal religious identity met with levels of resistance that I initially was completely unprepared to see or respond to. When I started at the school in 1990, the school's core faculty, staff, board, and student body were almost entirely white, and it had been so for nearly 100 years. I felt strongly that a white enclave, even a liberal religious one, was not an adequate context in which to educate religious leaders for the actual context we are in America. the actual context of a nation forged through racial violence and exploitation that benefited whites. Also, it was clear to me, as a nerd and a scholar, that the most creative, interesting, empowering, and transformative scholarship in theology and religion and ethics was being produced by people coming from historically marginalized communities and identities, such as queer theology, womanist and feminist theologies, and more. So we set about bringing into being a transformed community for teaching and learning, with women and people of color in the lead. Our first step was to hire 2 men of color for our faculty, and when we did, the backlash began. Backlash from white religious liberals. The process was decried as faulty. The fact that white men esteemed holders of what we used to call tall steeple churches, that such white men did not get the job was lamented. People sent hate mail. And the school's largest donor quit, pulling all his funds and writing a letter to our top 50 contributors asking them to withhold their giving to the school, and along the way, accusing me of mental instability for having advocated this change, as well as sexual immorality, for having led the school down this path. When we appealed to our denomination's board of trustees for backup, our appeal was met with silence. The men of color who accepted the call to be part of the school's faculty had to face hostility in the classroom from white students who had never been instructed by a person of color. And they also had to deal with a storm of public outcry about their insuitability for the role. I narrate this in some granular detail in order to lift up the reality of what people of color have to engage with if they choose to be part of the transformation of historically white liberal religious institutions and movements. And I would like to call their names. Those people of color whose energy and creativity and love helped transform Starr King School. Yobanzi Charles Johnson, Alma Faith Crawford, Ibrahim Farajage, Amina Wadud, Ghazala Anwar, and now the new president of the school, Rosemary Bray McNabb. The pattern of backlash that began with that first set of appointments of people of color has continued as a pattern every time a person of color was moved into greater leadership at the school, including most recently when the school hired its first woman of color president. The process was challenged. I was called immoral for my participation in the process. And Rosemary Bray McNabb had to step into leadership in a context of troubled waters, and not the kind of troubled waters God wants. We can say of the school, nevertheless, she persisted. The school. But this pattern of backlash and its toxic impact on the hearts and minds and bodies of the people working for this change took a toll on people's spirits, people's physical health, on the relationships among the people. And we have to be honest in our facing into the way the cost of backlash actually hurts us. And we have to take time to heal, to recover, to support one another, and find the ways to resist these impacts. One of the things that helped us, just one moment, was when our Board of Trustees met, and after considerable hand-wringing and worry about how we were going to go forward, since about 15% of our income stream had been dropped by people who stopped supporting the school. One of the white men on the board, and we were having all this criticism, one of the white men on the board who was solidly behind the commitments we had made said, well, we just have to learn to interpret the sound of shit hitting the fan as applause. And this brings me to my third field note. Solidarity work needs joy and laughter. Joy and laughter can break through the power of fear and open a space for human connecting.